to today's Take 5. Today we are going to be in Acts chapter 22, and we are just going to go ahead and start in verse 1. It says, "Brothers and fathers, hear the defense that I now make before you." And when they heard that he was addressing them in the Hebrew language, they became even more quiet, and he said, okay, so I'm just going to pause here and give you some background. So Paul addresses the Jews in their native language, which results in them even being more quiet than they were. And so keep in mind that in chapter 21, we had learned that this was a crowd. This wasn't just a handful of people. This was a massive crowd. In fact, it was the whole city. And we can see that in verse 30. It says, then all the city was stirred up, and the people ran together. They seized Paul and dragged him out of the temple, and at once the gates were shut. So continuing on in verse 3, it says, "I am a Jew, born in Tarsus in Cilicia, but brought up in the city, educated at the feet of Gamaliel, according to the strict manner of the law of our fathers, being zealous for God, as all of you are to this day, I persecuted this way." When he's saying I persecuted this way, he is talking about Christians, because Christians referred to themselves as this way because, as Jesus had said, that he is the way, the truth, and the life in John chapter 14, verse 6. And so he says, "I persecuted this way to the death, binding and delivering to prison both men and women, as the high priest and the whole council of elders can bear me witness. From then I received letters to the brothers, and I journeyed toward Damascus to take those also who were there and bring them in bonds to Jerusalem and to be punished." So Paul literally piles on his Jewish credentials in this section. And the idea behind that was, how could the Jewish countrymen not listen to him with all of his record? And so we see that continuing on, that Paul goes to tell of his conversion, and then he goes on to say that the Lord had warned him to get out of Jerusalem because the Lord knows all things and knew that the Jews were actually plotting to kill him in Jerusalem. And so then he quotes in verse 21, he says, "And he said to me, go, for I will send you far away to the Gentiles." Now, up until this point, the Jews listened to him. But upon hearing that he was going to go to the Gentiles, the Jews wanted to do away with Paul. In verse 22, it says, up to this word, they listened to him. Then they raised their voices and said, "Away with such a fellow from the earth, for he should not be allowed to live," because he was going to the Gentiles, because any devout Jew would not even associate themselves with the Gentiles. But we all know that Jesus was different, and so should his followers, and so were his followers. So if he had left out that key detail, he probably would have been let go because of his credentials, because of who he was. But he had to be faithful in his witness. And no matter what it cost him, he would rather be a prisoner than give up his burden for lost souls and missions. And so this was actually the 6th time that Paul's life was in danger because of a stirred up crowd. And despite the challenges, Paul pressed on. When he was beaten, stoned, and left for dead, Paul got up and went back. He refused to give up. And so I want to ask you to look into your own life. Do we possess the same endurance? Do we have the same willingness to take risks, to tell others about Jesus? Or do we immediately retreat at just the thought of opposition or the risk of being canceled? There's this thing of cancel culture. It's everywhere, where if you say or do the wrong thing, immediately you're canceled. You're basically, it's like you're being thrown off the face of the earth, essentially. But not essentially, because you're not being thrown off the face of the earth. But it's like, anyways, look it up. You'll find out. And so are we content with leaving out key details to not offend anyone, and content with cheap grace And I use that terminology, and I want to define it. Bonhoeffer said that cheap grace is the preaching of forgiveness without requiring repentance, baptism without church discipline, communion without confession, absolution without personal confession. Cheap grace is grace without discipleship, grace without the cross, grace without Jesus Christ, living and incarnate. So I am convinced that we will never be able to argue anybody to Jesus, to the cross. But we can live like Jesus has commanded us to. We can love others, and sometimes that's telling them hard truths. But we need to get it in our heads and live knowing that there are going to be risks. There are risks with absolutely everything. You wake up and you automatically accept the risk of getting into your car and driving to work or school, or eating food that possibly has been expired, or going to Walmart. You're accepting risk with everything. And I'm afraid that we're so content in accepting those risks, but when it comes to the things of Jesus and the cross, we don't want to take those risks. We don't want to tell somebody about Jesus, not because they've ever been opposed or have said that they are opposed to Christianity and Jesus, but because we are afraid that even by suggesting or telling them about the gospel, that they'll immediately not like us, that they will unfriend us, that they will cancel us, that they will blow up in our faces, that they will just not like us. And so we don't even tell them about Jesus, not because we know that that's what they're going to say, but that's because we think that that's what they're going to say and that's what they're going to do. And chances are they're not. And so you guys don't have to have all of the answers. Really, truly, you do not have to have all of the answers. And it's a lie that Satan says that you have to have all of this knowledge to be qualified to tell people about Jesus. God does not call the qualified, he qualifies the called. And he has commanded us to go into all the world and tell them about Jesus. And so what are you doing? I've always been amazed at the fact when a new show comes out, how quick everybody is to jump on the bandwagon. I think back to like 2020, whenever we were in the early stages of quarantine and Tiger King came out and everybody was talking about Tiger King. I mean, you would see statuses on Facebook, you would say in just conversation, people would bring up Tiger King. And I just want to note that I never watched it because anyways, but so many people love to talk about their favorite shows. They love to talk about what's new, what's in. But do we see the same conversations about Jesus? Do we see the same conversations about what God is doing in your life? Do we have those conversations where we bring it up and just talk about Jesus, what he's done for us? Nobody can deny what God has done in your life. And just start with that. Everybody knows John 3:16, like the verse. If you've gone to church for a couple times, if you went to Vacation Bible School, chances are you know that. If you don't, it's a super easy verse to look up and to learn, and I encourage you to do so. But just start with that. Start with something. Start with anything. Be willing to take risk for Jesus because he is worth it. He is worth it every single time. He will always be worth it. And yeah. So I just want to encourage you guys to just live it out and to not be afraid anymore. Yeah, Jesus is too good to keep a secret, and the world needs a lot of hope. And so here we have it, and what are we doing to share it? Talk to you guys next week. Bye.